Eagles Entertainment.
Eagle Eye in the Sky is fueled by Gatorade, the official sports drink of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Anything that move, I don't care who it is. Let's go. Give me everything you got. Play fast, play hard. Let's beat these boys tonight in their house. It's party time. It's party time. There we go. Touchdown!
You are listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Now here's your host, Fran Duffy.
That's right, another week, and we're talking Cowboys today as the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, continues. I'm Fran Duffy, and as always, I think we've got a great show for you here on episode number 254. At the top of this week's show, we've got Chalk Talk, where I chat with a guy who knows this Dallas Cowboys team as well as anybody in the media sphere, and that's Bryan Broaddus, longtime NFL personnel man. Was here in Philadelphia, he was in Green Bay, long time down in Dallas as well, and he was with the Dallas Cowboys website up until last year. You can now check him out on 105.3 down there in the DFW. And Bryan joins me this week to dive deep into this Cowboys roster, how they're built, their strengths, their weaknesses, obviously some new faces both on the sideline and on the field this year. How does it all fit together? We're going to hash it all out. Now, it's time for Chalk Talk.
Let's get down to business. It's time for Chalk Talk.
Well, as I mentioned at the top of the show, really excited to welcome in longtime NFL personnel man and a guy that knows this Dallas Cowboys team inside and out, one Bryan Broaddus. Bryan, thanks so much for joining us here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade.
Well, thank you very much, Fran. Great to be with you. I feel like I'm a part of you guys in a little bit of a way. You know, my days back working in Philadelphia and that draft that we were fortunate enough to have in 1998. And, you know, heck, Jeff Lurie, Joe Banner, they didn't know a whole heck of a lot about Andy Reid before I got there either. So myself, Mike Lombardi, we tried to help them along as best we could. So, again, I do feel a certain connection with you guys, even though I'm from Dallas, Texas. So that's kind of a funny thing to deal with these days.
Yeah, no question. Obviously, long history with the Dallas Cowboys, both in the front office and then most recently with DallasCowboys.com. You've always been such a great creator of content. Like I said, you know this team inside and out. So I thought, you know what, no one better than Bryan to bring onto this show and just kind of give us a little bit of a peek into this roster, how it's built. And obviously, look, it's a new coaching staff. So a little bit of a new philosophy here at the top with Mike McCarthy. And I kind of wanted to start on that side. What do you see the identity of this offense being in 2020? Obviously, with Mike McCarthy coming in, he had the year off being a head coach, and there were all the pieces out there, with him sitting down and learning new age analytics and getting new ideas. But I want to get your thoughts on what he's really going to bring to this team. And also, with Kellen Moore remaining as the play caller, as the offensive coordinator, how do you see those two guys meshing together? Because the offense in Dallas took such big steps with Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator last year.
Yeah, it sure did, Fran. I mean, there were some things that, happened down in the red zone that were problematic for this team, and what we're trying to learn a little bit about Kellen Moore was he held back some because of Jason Garrett. Did Jason Garrett believe, okay, we've got to get Ezekiel Elliott involved more down there. We got to get Dak. We don't really want to. We don't trust Dak. Those are the kinds of questions we're asking. But the more you dug in, it's like, no, the coaching staff really trusted Dak. They trusted, what he could do down there and stuff. That just a lot of it, was poor execution in a lot of different ways. And so, it was very surprising when you ask about what you feel like the direction of the offense is going to be. We were all convinced during the draft, and I think you probably were convinced as much as you followed the draft, that they were going to take the defensive end chase on. We were doing the night of the draft, and we were all sitting there, and Jeff Kavanaugh, myself, we were like, it's going to be chase on, it's chase on, and then here's CeeDee Lamb sitting on the board, and all of a sudden you're going, okay, well here we go. They're going to take him, and then you guys are going to get CeeDee Lamb, and it was going to be a great deal for the Eagles. But when they took Lamb, now all of a sudden things changed in our minds. It's like, man, they went for the best available player on the board. Okay, what does that mean about the offense? That means that, you know what? They valued going out there and getting a receiver, a top line, top flight receiver, and when they already had receivers on their roster that were pretty good. If you talk about with Amari Cooper and then also with Michael Gallup, adding a third receiver, was that really the necessary thing to do? So, a lot of people were like, wow, you couldn't fault him for making the move, but I think that's the direction that we're looking at right now, Fran, is that, will Mike McCarthy's job coming on board. And to be honest with you, we haven't had a whole heck of a lot of conversations with Mike McCarthy. I mean, this thing with the pandemic, and we should be in Oxnard, California right now watching training camp practices and stuff, and we're not. So, we're trying to figure all this stuff out. But I feel like, though, that Mike, in his year off, watched what other teams around the league were doing with the 11 personnel stuff, with the 3 wide receivers, the 1 tight end. They signed Blake Jarwin to an extension. They do have, Ezekiel Elliott as a primary running back with Pollard as a backup. So offensively, everything seems to be in place for them to be able to push the ball, to help Dak Prescott, with weapons down the field, to be able to run the ball when they get into some 11 personnel stuff. So we'll see how much that Mike McCarthy, that year off, how he'll coach Kellen Moore to run the offense. I think Kellen's got some great concepts, but what will his stamp be like? Okay, this is how I want to, when I was off that year, I want to see you attack defenses this way. And I think the 11 personnel stuff with those 3 wide receivers and the 1 tight end is going to be the way that they're going to do it. They know this day and age, you have to put the ball in the air to score points, to put teams in harm's way defensively. And I think that's what his idea is going to be. It's easy to say, for me to talk about. We'll see if the execution of it is any good.
Sure, and obviously, I know that you followed Mike McCarthy during his career in Green Bay. If I remember right, you won a Super Bowl out in Green Bay earlier in your career. When you look at Mike McCarthy, I remember studying that offense, studying that scheme. It was an execution-based offense. It was a lot of simple, basic West Coast offense concepts, double slant, stick, all the basic stuff that's like day one install, but they ran it over and over and over. And they did such a great job of creating those complementary plays off that with, the different sluggos and double moves off. That's the stick nod stuff to kind of throw defenses for a loop. And then you have Aaron Rodgers, who was able to create and run around and make plays. That's why I'm very interested, because when you looked at Kellen Moore last year, you mentioned all the great concepts that they were able to run, a lot of timing-based stuff and really well-executed concepts. Seeing those two kind of mesh together, I think it's going to be really interesting for that offense, for that personnel.
It will be, and that's going to be the really how much will it, you and I studied the Packers, so we understand the Packers and what Mike McCarthy was doing in his last couple of years. I mean, when you got a guy like Aaron Rodgers, I was talking to Sean Payton about this one time, and it was sometimes you have a quarterback that knows so much that when you call a play that he kind of looks at you like, I'm not going to run that. I'm going to run this. I'm going to. So, you have these young quarterbacks, and they do whatever the coach tells them. Okay, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. Good. Don't change plays. Keep doing, And then you get a veteran guy, and he's like, and Tony Romo, the latter part of Tony Romo's career, he was in that situation too, where he was trying to, he would get a play call from the sidelines, and then he would just, okay, no, I'm going to do this. I see this. So, I think that's where, McCarthy has to look at Kellen Moore. He has to, he's now had a chance to go back and evaluate what worked for the Cowboys, what things were that you can hang your hat on. And you could say, okay, this will work for us with the personnel that we got. These are the things I don't ever want to see again. And the influences of Mike McCarthy. Yeah, there's some things there that Mike has picked up over the years that he's done that are different than what Jason Garrett was doing and what he learned from Norv Turner and stuff like that. So the marriage of maybe the two, some ideas from Kellen Moore, it could make this team a lot different. We'll probably not get to see until that Los Angeles Rams game opening day, really overall what they're going to be.
Sure. It's always a melting pot, especially in that room of what the game plan is going to look like on a weekly basis. So let's get to the personnel now. You talk about Dak Prescott, and, there's obviously, we'll get to the big question with Dak, but ultimately, how do you feel that he would be affected by the presence of Mike McCarthy? Is he affected by the presence of Mike McCarthy as the head man in that building?
Yeah, I think it'll be an interesting dynamic. And I brought this up on our radio show the other day, and got in some, I don't know if you want to call it trouble with Dak's brother and all that about him wanting to be here or not, that kind of thing, even though his brother, tweeted out that, hey, we don't know how long things, okay. But anyway, it's, with Dak, it's a situation he really, really liked Jason Garrett, and Jason Garrett had his back in this organization. There was a lot of times where Jerry Jones was very critical of Dak and some Monday morning meetings after games. And he would say, is this really our guy? Is this the guy that's going to lead us? And Jason Garrett was the one guy that would stand up and say, no, this guy's got it. He's legitimate. We can win with this guy. We'll make some adjustments. We'll do what we have to do. And so, Jason had his back. So, every day after practice, I'll remember this at training camp, those guys sit there and throw with each other. After when Dak was a rookie, they used to play a game where they used to, you get points for putting the ball in certain spots. And to this day, he was still playing that game with Jason Garrett. So there was a lot of admiration between the two. And, you look at, Jason Garrett was the one on draft night that fought for Dak. So it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic does change now. Dak is a veteran. He's on the tag now. He's trying to play for that big contract. And so, will Mike McCarthy bring that out of him? Will he bring him to another level? Will he make him a quarterback that instead of talking about him as a guy that maybe somewhere between 9 and 12, do you talk about him in the top 5? That's the whole plan right there. And Mike's been very fortunate to be with great quarterbacks. I mean, he was with Brett Favre. He was with Aaron Rodgers. But then if you go back early in his career, he's been with some guys that did a pretty good job. So that's the hope. That the year out of football is the hope that Mike McCarthy comes back refreshed, ready to go, ideas in hand, ideas in head, and then tries to push Dak into a level where he's not the 9th best quarterback, but the 5th best quarterback in the league.
I'm not going to ask you to put a number on it because I think that's silly, but do you envision any path where he's not the quarterback in 2021 or 2022?
Well, that's a fair question. You're not putting anything. I mean, that's the way this negotiation has gone. And, I think it's really unfair. I mean, there's people calling each other out about the negotiations. And if you make a comment about it, you're either a Dak hater in our market or a Dak apologist, and
right.
And that's the way. I mean, you work in a market the same way. I understand WIP. I mean, I know all those folks, they're all very talented people, and it starts at 6 in the morning and it ends at 7 or 8 midnight, whatever. I mean, they're going after you, they're attacking you. And, I think that's, I do envision, I really do. There is going to be, Fran, I believe there's going to be an organization that has a general manager. There's 2 really that have family run. The Bengals and the Cowboys are family run where the personnel guys are the family members. I do believe we're going to see a general manager, maybe one of those, maybe it's Stephen Jones, that doesn't pay a quarterback $40 million. Okay, that's just, now I'm not saying it might not be Dak Prescott, but I'm just saying, though, someone says, you know what, we can win with a $20 million year quarterback, or we can win with an $18 million year quarterback. We don't have to have the 40 because we're taking our roster and we're building it with the line, the receivers, the back, defense, and all that. So all it's going to take is one. These general managers in this day and age, they don't have very long. They really, really don't. I mean, look at Howie. Howie had it, was gone for a couple of years, and then got it back. I mean, that was very fortunate how things worked out for him in Philadelphia. But, that's what I'm saying. General managers won't sacrifice the quarterback play because they know to keep their job, they got to have one. Look what's happening in Chicago right now. Those guys, they tied themselves to Mitch Trubisky. And all of a sudden now it's like, whoa, Mitch Trubisky might not even be the quarterback. Then what happens to the general manager there, So there's a lot of things when you're dealing with these quarterbacks. If you have the guts to say, we're not going to pay a guy $40 million and we're going to keep drafting, keep building our team, but we're going to supplement our quarterback will be a $20 million a year guy. And this is the first time I could ever remember, Fran, all my years working in the National Football League since 1992, where all of a sudden there were quarterbacks available. I mean, it was crazy when I was a personal man early at the Cowboys in the early 2000s when you guys were beating our brains out every week. We didn't have a quarterback, and we never had the opportunity to grab one. And in this market today, you had a chance to go get Brady, Cam Newton, had a chance to go get all these guys, Jameis Winston. So, yeah, people are maybe taking a little bit of a different attitude. Still a really, really important position, but So I guess to answer your question, could Dak Prescott be on the way? That's going to be one of those things where if they don't feel like that they're going to get a long-term deal done, maybe that's a tag and trade situation. I know they'd like to get a deal done, talking with Stephen Jones about it, but we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, and you mentioned, the amount of money that they've already allocated to other positions. You mentioned the running back. You already mentioned Ezekiel Elliott earlier as well. To me, it's going to be really interesting with the change in coaching staff. With Mike McCarthy coming in. How much does Ezekiel Elliott's role change? We saw him so much more in the passing game the last couple of years. We know what he can do in that area. I wonder, when you have that much money put into that position, you'd like them to be the foundation. You'd like it to be what Christian McCaffrey has been, what Ezekiel Elliott has been for the Dallas Cowboys. Do you envision that role changing for Zeke moving forward at all?
Well, I know with Jason Garrett and that staff, when they'd have staff meetings, it was the constant – where they would try and say, okay, let's think about this, and let's think about this, and let's think about this. And then Jason Garrett would always remind the staff, hey, we still got number 21. Let's remember that. And so all of a sudden now the meeting is going this direction, and all of a sudden the head coach says, well, let's take it this direction. And so, you never want to disappoint the head coach because you want to keep your job. So, I think the thing with Ezekiel Elliott is that the number of touches, I think that's been really one of those things. You watch the games, you've seen some of those games. I mean, he's had some nice games, throughout his career, played against the Eagles, had some nice games, but he doesn't look as explosive as he once was. And, you wonder, okay, all the touches at Ohio State, the touches through the first 4 years of his career. Now, yeah, he sat out with some suspension and things like that, but still he was carrying the ball a lot. And so, is it going to be a thing where they, Mike McCarthy, when he was a coordinator when in New Orleans way back in the day, had 2,000-yard players at the time. He was, he had backs that were capable of running the football. In Green Bay, he was kind of piecemealing some things together with the backs and he's never really had a back. Maybe you're going to say Deuce McAllister at the Saints.
Eddie Lacy at his peak, maybe.
Yeah, Eddie Lacy.
Right,
yeah, I mean, if you want to say that. But he's never had a guy like this. So I think it's like we talked about earlier, it's going to be about throwing the football with Dak. But then, okay, how can we – and it's going to sound really simplistic for me to say this right now. How do you spread people out? How do you make the light box? And then how do you take advantage of Ezekiel Elliott running the football? And if you're getting it at 4.5, 5.5 yards a shot, how much are you going to really do that? I think the number of carries for Ezekiel Elliott will come down this year. I don't think you're going to see him have 300 carries, 300 touch. I don't think you will. I think that number is going to come down significantly. And, and then they're going to figure out ways to kind of keep him fresh, keep him in the game, but also try and get him, get him quality touches where it's not just keep handing the ball in it. And then it goes, then you see him getting slower and slower as the game goes on.
Yeah, I guess the thought too, you have Tony Pollard in year 2, and obviously he's kind of a do-everything player. Maybe he could take some of that load, especially in the passing game, off of Zeke's shoulders. Certainly it's going to be something interesting to follow. And you mentioned, the ability to spread people out, and now let's see if we can get Zeke going. At the very top of the show, you talked about the selection of CeeDee Lamb, and I'm really interested to see how they deploy these 3 guys, with Amari Cooper, with Michael Gallup, with CeeDee Lamb. How do you kind of see, not necessarily the rotation, but how they're deployed and who lines up where and how they're used?
Yeah, I think, when they lost Randall Cobb, when he signed with the Houston Texans, and there were people that kind of were connecting dots. Okay, you got Mike McCarthy. Oh, wait, Randall Cobb's going to stay on another 1 year, $5 million, $6 million deal. And, he got a nice offer from the Texans to leave. I don't blame him for going and doing that. But, he played well in the slot for the Cowboys. He really, really did. And so I envision initially that what you're going to see is you're going to see Cooper play on the outside. You're going to see Michael Gallup play on the outside, and then they're going to put CeeDee Lamb inside and let him operate that way. Gallup, I don't think Gallup's more of an outside player. Now Cooper can play inside, and if it becomes too much, and in this day and age, as you know, Fran, there's a lot of teams that are taking their best corners and they're putting them inside on the slot because they know that that's a hard position, because in the slot you have that ability to take it at what we call a two-way go. You can go you could go anywhere in the field. When you play on the outside, it's kind of like these defenders do a great job of using the sidelines against you. And a great example of that was last year in the Lions game when Amari Cooper was playing against Darius Slay. Slay used the sidelines well against him, and you guys now have Slay, so that's something you have to think about. Like, okay, where do I need to put? But I initially feel like that, if Lamb can handle things from the slot, and he's capable of doing it. We saw him do it at Oklahoma. If he could do that, and then, that would free up Cooper on the outside. If he can't do that, then they'll kick Cooper inside before they would kick Gallup inside. I think Gallup is the one guy that's always going to be on the outside. The other two guys could be a little bit more interchangeable for him.
When you look at receivers, you mentioned that, I know Oklahoma did slide CD inside at times, but a large majority of his routes, came to the far left of the formation. If with the abridged offseason being what it is and training camp not being normal, do you feel how do you kind of look at that as a personnel guy? Having been inside the building, do you envision that being a little bit of an issue, or is it? Or how do you feel that'll go for CD this summer?
That's a great question, because I think there's a lot of kids around the league, and everybody needs these rookies to play. They really, really do. You can't. You look at your guy Rager. I love your receiver Rager. I really, really do. I think he's got a shot to be like offensive rookie of the year. I really, really do. I think when you talk about the returning and stuff like that, okay, let's think. Okay, what is his route tree about? What does he know? How does he play during games? Does he come from a sophisticated passing offense? All these rookies, I think, at receiver are all kind of in the same boat. Is like, okay, can you understand when you line up and a defense comes up on you? And Rager and CeeDee Lamb are really in the same boat, because they played in the same conference, where the defensive backs didn't play press man a lot. They didn't walk up on you, And that's the thing that you'll see in the pros. You understand that as well as anybody, that if you're trying to get release on these, and we're talking about timing offenses and stuff like that, and you're trying to release and then you get held up, and then the ball comes your direction and you're not in a position to catch the ball, you're going to have some problems. And so that, I think, the learning curve for some guys is really steep, especially at wide receiver. But then there's some guys that are really natural. I remember Michael Thomas coming out of Ohio State. There were some questions like, there's some questions about it, but you were like going, he went to the perfect system for him, because he had a quarterback that knew how to get him the ball no matter where he was. If he got jammed up, he'd wait for him, get him the ball. So, I think that's going to be, all these rookie receivers are going to have to learn how to separate, how to get off the line, and then being able to just on the fly to catch these balls. Don't let them bounce up in the air and cause turnovers that way, because we've seen that with some of the young receivers that have come into this league.
No question. I want to get into the trenches, because obviously that offensive line, so many accolades with that group. And when they're at their peak, when that offense has been humming, it's been that offensive line that has been kind of the engine that makes it go. So I want to ask you, obviously you have some turnover, starting with Travis Frederick. Who's going to step in for Travis Frederick? How do you envision that going, with what you've seen from that group so far?
If you got any suggestions, feel free to let me know. I think that there's going to be a competition. And this is, if anything is going to hold the Cowboys back, and we could talk about the defense and, what all is going to happen at corner, and the defensive tackle is going to be better, or, hey, the linebackers, what's the health? All those questions are fair game. I do feel like the biggest question, though, is what's going to happen at center and what's going to happen at left guard. This team is, it's very mirror image the way the Eagles and the Cowboys are built when you start talking about the offensive line, and all of a sudden when you guys lose your guy, you lose your guard. Now you all of a sudden you're having to, go back and get an old piece to kind of put back in there, and kind of thing. And I think those are things when you start messing with the continuity of that group. And, the Travis Frederick stuff was, he played well, but he was never going to be Travis Frederick. Mentally, he was going to be Travis Frederick. Physically, he wasn't going to be Travis Frederick. And I think he realized that. I think he was like, listen, I can't play at the high level that I once played at. And now, you've got three young guys, Broadus from Wisconsin, you're looking at, McGovern, who was drafted in, the third round. He got a hurt pec. he had no training camp, no regular season. He needed to practice. He needed to be the 10th offensive lineman and be inactive every week. That's what he needed to be, and he got none of that. So the Cowboys, and then Connor Williams the last couple of years, he's gotten bigger, he's gotten a little stronger, but it hasn't translated for him in the way that there's any consistency. If you grade him for 65 plays, he's going to have 60 good plays and 5 plays where you're going to cover your eyes, and that might be the difference in you winning or losing a game. And, so that I think for the Cowboys, that's going to be the biggest issue right now is who is going to be the starter at center? Could it be a rookie or could it be, with Joe Looney, who's played before, he's a veteran. I want to believe that with a new staff that they're going to go young inside. I want to believe that, but coaches tend to fall back into things that, okay, let's put the guy in there with no training camp, no practices.
Right.
Let's put the guy in there that knows what he's doing right now.
Yep.
And that's maybe why Joe Looney would get an opportunity to be in there. But I would like to see them try and roll that young group for sure.
Yeah, especially like you said, with that shortened off season, I would imagine Looney's got the leg up. Do you feel like this is a make or break year for Connor Williams?
I really do, because what I think is going to happen is that if Connor Williams doesn't win the left guard job, he now becomes your swing tackle. He now becomes your swing guard, and they'll even work him some at center. That was something that they were trying to do. So, yeah, there was a 2nd-round pick. The first year he wasn't strong enough. Fletcher Cox, those guys inside ate him up pretty well. People figured out you get him one-on-one, he's going to have some problems. And, he got stronger the next year. He got a knee injury. There's a lot of things that have kind of gone downhill for him. But he is definitely a veteran that is in a battle for his roster, or not for his roster spot, I think, but for his starting spot there at left guard.
You are an LSU guy, so I know you've been studying La'el Collins ever since he joined the Dallas Cowboys. But when you look at him and the total body of work at right tackle, how do you kind of grade him against the rest of the league? Like, where do you feel like he stacks when you're talking about offensive tackle play in the league?
That's a great question, because I feel like, though, he played against Khalil Mack. There was a couple years ago when the team went all the way out to Oakland. It was a Sunday night game or one of those things, and Khalil Mack was over him. He was Khalil Mack playing that left end, not the traditional right end, and Khalil Mack was just it was coming after him every snap, and La'el Collins hung in there just tremendously well, and it was got to the point where they moved Mack to the other side to rush and that was against Tyron Smith, just so they, he wasn't going anywhere. And I think the thing with La'el Collins is, he's the one guy that every year has gotten a little better. And it was like, okay, they move him from guard. There were questions about him playing tackle. He has the Khalil Mack game late in the year. He has 2 or 3 really good games after that, and he's not looked back since. If you ask me who is the most consistent, and people say, well, hey, Broadus, what about Zach Martin? Well, what about Travis Frederick? Well, what about Tyron Smith? No, it was La'el Collins. You could grade La'el Collins every week, and he wouldn't have the number of minuses that you might have with the other guys. He's been that impressive with the way he's played, and then the level in which he's played has gone up. It hasn't been an up, and then a way down. He's been up, and then up in the way he goes. And if he continues to do that, I think a lot more people are going to realize really what a really solid, dependable right tackle he is in this league. Much like with what you guys, with Lane Johnson and how he plays and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm guilty of it as anybody, where it's like coming out of LSU. I really feel La'el Collins is a guard, not a tackle. And then when he makes that move, I'm like, I just don't know. You see him give up a sack, and you start feeling back. I really felt like he was better guard, but I know you've studied him so closely.
He was a left tackle. He was a left tackle at LSU.
Yeah.
He was. That's what he played. And so, you knew. And there were you're right. There was some questions that we even had watching him play at guard, and you're going, man, I don't know. Does he need to move out to tackle? Because you really questioning. But he like I said, that Khalil Mack game that night in Oakland, that really gave him the confidence that he could play that position.
What's the mindset right now in Dallas in terms of Tyron Smith and his future and how much more he's got in the tank? Obviously, he's been beat up by injuries, but one of the best tackles that we've had really in this generation of players.
Yeah, Fran, he is. I mean, he's been outstanding, and the back injury. It's funny when we get the inactives or you watch warm ups. And with his back, you never know. He could go on the road and sleep, downtown Philly in one of your hotels and wake up with a back problem, because of a bed or something like that. So, he works extremely hard. He's still reasonably for an offensive lineman. He's young and he's played a lot of years. I mean, his experience is, he's a heavy-handed guy. He's powerful, but the back injury has robbed him of some of his mobility. And, he still gets respect out there, but a lot of it is having to fight through a lot of things with him. I mean, he'll fight through some injuries and stuff like that. And, I have the utmost respect for him because when he does play, I mean, he's a very prideful guy, and he doesn't want to give up pressure. He doesn't want to give up sacks. He takes it personally. And, but the back injury is legit. And you just never know if it's a practice to practice, a game to game. When he's out, he'll miss a couple of games, and that's something you always kind of have to plan for as you get ready for the season.
Yeah, and I mean, right now, Mitch Hyatt, I guess, is in the program. Terrence Steele, a young kid from Texas Tech. Brandon Knight, I know, has been there about a year for the kid. I believe he was an A&M kid as well. I don't know what's the answer, I guess, behind him at this point.
Well, that's okay. This is where it gets a little fun because then now you're going to start to see is Connor Williams, like I said,
Right.
In Texas, he was a left tackle. I mean, they even flirted with Zach Martin. If you remember, evaluating Zach Martin at Notre Dame, he played left tackle. And I think that it would probably kick Lyle Collins over to the left side, and then you'd put somebody over on the right side, maybe. But yeah, they lived that. We had a time where we had a kid in the Atlanta named Green that was just, they gave 7 sacks.
Yeah, Chaz Green, yep.
Yeah, right. and Chaz Green, and that's nobody ever wanted. Finally Garrett admitted that they screwed that up. That was their fault, coach's fault. They thought they were cavalier, and you never want to get in that situation again. But I think that instead of playing a Mitch Hyatt, who was a really good player at Clemson, 4-year player, he was not ready. And this is where once again the pandemic kills some of these young kids. Because there's guys that need strength and training program. Tristan Hill, the defensive tackle, he needed an off season of lifting and getting stronger. And then when you take that all away, when these kids aren't around it, they're not going to bust their rear like they should when they're around their other teammates. And that's why sometimes they get left behind that way.
Yeah, it's certainly an issue that all 32 teams and all the college teams are going to be fighting through this year. Let's go over to the defensive side. Mike Nolan comes in as the defensive coordinator, and he has been a lot of 3-4, some 4-3. I'm interested to kind of get your thoughts on how this personnel, which has been 4-3 for a handful of years since Wade Phillips, how is this group going to be utilized?
Yeah, it's a great question because we're all trying to learn. I know Mike personally, back in the day, always been very nice to me when I visit with him. I hadn't talked to him since he got here, believe it or not, because we haven't been able to have any interaction.
Right.
But it's I think that Mike, and he's been in the league for 30 something years, and he's been at a lot of different places, how much was he influenced with the Ravens? How much was he influenced in Atlanta? How much was he influenced in New Orleans? He's got a lot of things that he could draw from, experiences. I mean, when his personnel's been good, they've been good. When his personnel's been bad, in the last couple of years, he coordinated a defense in Atlanta. They were 28th and 30th. I mean, it was numbers like that. It was not good. And, so now you have those questions, but then you talk about some of the other stuff like the Ravens, like I said, they had a top, 10 defense. And, he's a very capable guy. With the previous regime, it was more about we'll give up yards. We don't want to give up points. Rod Marinelli, Chris Richard, that was, right. Hey, you can move the ball on us all day, but you're not going to score on us. That was their mindset. So I think Mike will try and be multiple, and I'm sorry, that's a buzzword, a cliche word, but I think he really will. I think teams realize that you have to be able to adjust series to series. I think this is where, with your guy, the way, that he does stuff in Philadelphia, you have to be able to adjust. You can't let people just lock in on you. The Jets game, they got locked in. They were, Chicago, Mitch Trubisky locked in, on certain things. So, I think that to me is, you have to be able to adjust almost series to series. We've seen it what they do with the Patriots. And I'm not saying there's a lot of teams that can play like the Patriots because they have the veteran players that can just do multiple things throughout a game. But I think that's what teams want to do. They want to get veteran guys. They want to get guys that can play a lot of different positions and then get in multiple fronts, multiple coverages, and not let these quarterbacks just hone in on something that they're seeing every single down. And I think that's what Mike wants to try and do. Now, can he do it with this secondary? Because, there's some questions at the cornerback spot. And, will they play well enough? Will they be confident enough? And, can they get the pass rush, the inside pressure? There's a lot of questions about this defense right now for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Chris Richard, not in the building anymore. He came from Pete Carroll and that, in that tree and the bigger corners. They want to kind of beat you up at the line of scrimmage. And I just thought it was so interesting that they go into the draft and they come away with Trayvon Diggs and they come away with the kid from Tulsa, Reggie Robinson. And they were both kind of built for that scheme. And it's just kind of interesting. Now they end up here in Dallas. How do you kind of look at that cornerback room, especially, Byron Jones, obviously no longer there. Now he's down in Miami. How do you see that secondary, especially that cornerback group kind of shaping up?
Yeah, that's going to be the question about how this defense overall works, Fran. I really do believe that, they've got to figure out, Chidobe Awuzie was the starter at the left corner. Byron started at the right corner. People went after Chido. They went after him in these games, and he didn't play with a whole heck of a lot of confidence. And, he had one game at the end against the Rams where he really played well, but the game was in hand. The Cowboys were controlling the game with the run, and they were getting pressure on Golf. And so, but the kid still played well. He lined up, he covered, he did what he had to do. But, the questions now, I mean, a guy like Jordan Lewis, is on this still here. And, Jordan's in the last year of his deal, and Jordan is a very competitive. He'll battle. He'll get up on you. He's got a really short memory. He's a long-armed kid. He's not very tall himself, but he's so competitive, and he doesn't care. I mean, doesn't care in a way like if you beat him, he's going to come back and battle even harder. And so that's where
for Eagles fans, it's almost like Avonte Maddox, but with Jalen Mills' mindset. He's
exactly. That's you're going to get beat sometimes. He's going to give up plays, but he just keeps battling. And Awuzie on the other side, he gives up a play, and then it kind of compounds on him, and you're like, oh, and then the lack of confidence shows. And and then, Anthony Brown is a veteran guy who he was a starter. Then they played him as a nickel, and he was better coming off the bench. You mentioned they go draft Diggs. I believe that Diggs is going to be one of the starters. I really do. Even with the pandemic and all that stuff, this kid's played in some big games, national championship games, playoff games. At Alabama, Nick Saban coaches. I've seen their practices. Nick Saban coaches the secondary. He wears those guys out. Pro techniques, all the things you want in a coach. This kid's ready to play. So they've got to figure out, does Diggs start on the left corner, and then who starts over on the right side? Is it Lewis, Brown, Awuzie? There's talk that maybe they might even move Awuzie to safety, but they've got, Clinton Dix and then, so they're kind of in a little bit of a mode right there. Xavier Woods as well of, okay, do we have a couple of starters, and would he be a backup guy? But there are more questions right now than there are solid answers. But I do feel like that the one thing that will happen is Diggs will be a starter, for Al Harris, who's the new secondary coach from, he came from Green Bay. He was a press man, get in your face kind of guy. And I'm sure he'll bring the same kind of attitude to these guys.
Yeah, Eagles fans very aware of Al
Yeah,
Harris and his play style
absolutely.
for sure. So take us through. Do you feel like with Mike Nolan, obviously knowing him as long as you have, mix of man and zone? I know in New Orleans lately they were like a big quarters team. Some cover
Right.
two mix. How do you kind of view the identity of that secondary that way?
Yeah, I think that you're going to see, like you're talking about they played so much single high here with,
Yeah,
and that was because Jeff Heath was able to play down. And, when the Cowboys played the Eagles, you saw Jeff Heath covering tight ends, when you guys would detach those tight ends, that was Heath's job to kind of stay with those guys and stuff like that. So, I think that you'll probably see, again, very cliche to say, I think you will see a mix. I think you're going to see some cover two stuff from these guys. You will still see some single high, but I don't think the Cowboys are going to be a single high team all the time. I mean, I thought like that teams just, I go back to the Jets game that these young quarterbacks, they showed them the same coverage every single snap. And these young quarterbacks, Sam Darnold, those guys are like, hey, it's the same look. I just knew where to throw the ball. I didn't get fooled. I didn't, and I don't think that's going to happen. I do think you're going to see mixes of man. I think you're going to see some zone. I think Mike is going to figure out what these guys can play successfully. But it also means like, okay, heck, if we're not very good at cover two, well, then we're going to have to learn how to be, because we just can't sit there and play press man the whole entire game and expect to get away with it. So I kind of feel like that you are going to see, a real mix of both. And then if you get one, if you're better than one or the other, maybe you'll lean to that just a little bit more during a game.
Yeah, you mentioned the idea of maybe moving Chidobe Awuzie back to safety. They signed Clinton Dix this offseason. I feel like if it's either of those guys, they're obviously a little bit more interchangeable than what Jeff Heath has been. I know they've got the
Right.
young kid Donovan Wilson that made some splash plays last summer especially. How do you feel that other safety spot kind of works itself out this summer? Do you feel like that's Ha's job to lose?
Yeah, my buddy John Snyder, my former intern at Seattle, he made a big trade. We were all in Dallas.
Yeah,
How do I get? How do I get out? I mean, I'll tell you what. It was funny. I was talking to some people in your organization too about it. I'm like, hey, you guys in on this one? And they're like, you guys in on this one? And that kind of thing. So it was kind of some fun back and forth. But I actually told a guy in Philly. I said, watch Seattle. Seattle's the team that's going to make this trade. And sure enough, I got the message back with the emoji, the smiling face, kind of thing. But yeah, I think when to talk about the safety play, they need the biggest question here in Dallas has been, where are the turnovers? Is this defense capable? And let me be honest with you. I watch practice every single day when I was at DallasCowboys.com. I saw the drills. They were trying to create turnovers. They're trying to punch the ball out. They're trying to pick up fumbles. They're trying to go around the corner and swat the ball out of the quarterback's hands. But, this is where, Clinton Dix, if he could come in and give them 3 to 5 interceptions, that's kind of been his career. He's always been around the ball, either knocks up in the air to him. He's in a good position. He plays with his eyes. He makes a play. Those are the things that they're going to need. These safeties, they Xavier Woods is very capable of making plays.
yep.
The problem is when Xavier Woods doesn't play with his eyes, he's a terrible player because he'll try and do too much. He'll try and play hero ball. And that happened with this defense last year. They had some guys, Jalen Smith. Jalen Smith's a nice player, but if he doesn't play his assignment, then he's no good to this defense. And that happened. You can't go play hero ball. You got to play the scheme. You got to play what your responsibilities are. And at safety, they just do not, and corner do not get their hands on enough balls. And that's why I think that, that if you look at Mike McCarthy, that he was able to say, hey, how about bringing Clinton Dix in and when he was with me, Al Harris, they were creating turnovers, they were getting after the ball. And so maybe that's the thing, but that is the huge question right now is this team just, can they create turnovers? That's the big question.
Yeah, Leighton Vander Esch was certainly his rookie year, was able to make some big plays, and I know missed a lot of time last year with that kind of lingering injury that goes back to his days at Boise State. How do you kind of view that situation moving forward?
Yeah, talking to the medical staff about that, I said, hey, are you going to know when it's the first hit, the first tackle, the first, and they were basically to a man was saying, no, this kid will be fine. He goes, now, is it something when it's your neck, you're always, heck yeah, you're concerned. I mean, if you tell me, oh, he had a knee injury, I can tell you when he could be back, or a shoulder injury. I can tell you when, but neck is a whole different thing. But this training staff, medical staff, very confident that Van Der Esch will come back. Now let's see. I mean, they're telling me the first hit or the 100th hit. It won't matter. I mean, it'll all be, it'll all be the same to him. So for the Cowboys' sake, they need Leighton Van Der Esch to be able to step up and give them that rookie year type of level of play. Tackles behind the line of scrimmage, sideline to sideline play, getting in the way of passes underneath, blitzing occasionally. They need him to be what he was that rookie year, because Jalen Smith, like I mentioned, was trying to do way, way too much. And, that affected the way that the defense was played.
So let's take a quick look at that defensive front, and I want to just ask you about like a story of player development. You look at Demarcus Lawrence, he's turned into one of the best pass rushers in the entire league. His development to me has just been fascinating because I liked him coming out of Boise State. He came in, I believe, as a second-round pick. Right. What has gone into that development? What exactly helped him kind of turn that corner to take that next step?
Yeah, the thing about Demarcus is that he's always wanting to learn. Early in his career, he was banged up. He was always hurt. There was something, the suspension, there was always something going on. And, the people were questioning, there's a second round pick for the Cowboys. Once again, it's not going to turn out. And, all of a sudden though, they found a spot for him playing at left defensive end. He's always been able to play against the run. That was something, with the length and his ability to control the point of attack blocker, get off blocks, don't let somebody get to your outside shoulder, keep that free, make a tackle, knife through. See, he's a guy that's always had that ability to rush the passer, but not give you the same rush. When you watch him on tape, he's got an outside game, he's got an inside game. He's got a spin game. He's got a one-arm push game. He's got a grab and pull game. He's got a rip game. He's got all these kinds of moves that he uses along the way. Now, what happened to him last year was that the defensive tackle play wasn't good enough. And this is why you see the Cowboys going out and getting McCoy and Poe and guys like that. They just weren't good enough. Antoine Woods was good a couple of years ago. He got banged up, but they really missed Tyrone Crawford in there next to Lawrence as a rusher. There were so many games that they were able to play because Crawford as a tackle is a great penetrator. And then now you're getting blockers and you're getting guards and tackles getting held up. And now you're getting a guy that's got some flexibility with Lawrence that's able to kind of attack the pocket, and so they worked really, really well together. And when Crawford wasn't in the lineup, that affected the way that Lawrence played. His pressure numbers were still real good. And I have a feeling that if your pressure numbers maintain, you're going to find ways to continue to get to the quarterback and get sacks. Robert Quinn did a great job coming in and getting the pressure off the other side. But, man, Crawford sure could have used better defensive tackle play next to him. I think that would have helped him even more.
I mean, you talk about Lawrence, Crawford. We've already mentioned Van Der Esch. Kellen Moore was a 7th-round pick out of Boise State. Cedric Wilson out of Boise State. There's a pipeline from Boise to Dallas. There's got to be some kind of a story there, right? Like, what is the connection between that program to Dallas?
We're starting to see that more and more, though. There's teams, these for so many years, Boise was like a nice little, wow, that's kind of crazy. I think the comparison now is Appalachian State. Right. To me, Appalachian State's the team that, you don't want to schedule Appalachian State like now because they will find a way to beat you early in the season. They're going to take the $900,000 you're going to give them for beating them and then move on, kind of a thing. And I think Boise was kind of the cute little team out, that nobody really knew about with the blue turf that played on Thursday nights. We were all like, oh, wow. And then you realize that Kellen Moore as a quarterback won like 53 games there, playing. And yeah, they've done a great job. And you even forgot Orlando Scandrick was a Boise State player. But yeah, that's the thing about it though, is that Boise's done a really good job. If you look at the coaching staff, the Chris Petersons, the guys like that along the way, it goes even further back with Haskins was a coach. They do a great job of taking kids that might fall through the cracks of those Pac-12 teams. Like, they have a lot of kids that should be at the end of the day, when you watch them, you're like, man, that kid should be playing at UCLA. That kid should be playing at Oregon. Oh, that kid should be playing at Washington State. So they got a lot of those kids that fall through the cracks, and the Boise coaches have done a great job of taking their talent and then using it in a way to shine. And I think a lot of NFL teams, not just the Cowboys, I think a lot of teams have looked at Boise because of the big games they play in, how competitive they are, and they say, "Wow, these players, they fit in well. They come in, they play hard, they do a great job." So, my hat's off to how they've built their program over there. It's just not the blue gimmick turf anymore. They got legitimate football players. Yeah.
Sure, no question. And you mentioned earlier, Robert Quinn steps in last year, has that good year across from Demarcus Lawrence. He leaves in free agency. So, Randy Gregory still the indefinite suspension. The team rolls the dice with Aldon Smith, who's been out of football the last couple of years. Obviously, you've got Tyrone Crawford, who's played some DN in the past, and there's some young guys in the rotation. But how do you see that opposite spot along whether it's defensive end or outside linebacker, edge rusher for that defense? How do you see that pairing out here this summer?
Yeah, that's another one of those questions you have to ask, much like the center and the left guard. Who's going to man that right end? Crawford would make a lot of sense. Under the old regime, they loved the way that Crawford and Lawrence both played on the edges to prevent teams from running the ball. Now, as a rusher, you want to kick Crawford inside and let him power the guards and stuff like that. But yeah, the big thing will be with Aldon Smith. Yeah, the Randy Gregory stuff is unfortunate, because I think that what's happened is Randy Gregory he's trying to work through the league, and then the league is the guy who was responsible for his case left the league, is gone. And so now he's having to kind of redo some things, and he's hopeful that he could somehow get back. But the whole thing with Aldon Smith really comes down to the relationship that Jim Tom Sula, who is the defensive line coach for the Cowboys, he had Aldon when he was at San Francisco. Jay Glazer had talked to Stephen Jones, Mike McCarthy, and then all of a sudden now you go to the coach with Jim Tom Sula, and Jim's like, "Yeah, we could get Aldon Smith. Yeah, sure." The Cowboys are famous for taking these guys that might have gone down the wrong path, and all of a sudden, so we'll see. This is the bad thing about not being able to go to training camp, Fran, is because we don't get to see him practice. I don't get to see him out there, how he looks. Is he physically bigger or better? They say he's up from his 260. I've never seen him play at 280. 278, whatever he's going to play at. I've never seen him play at that. So I'm interested, but I'd like to believe it would be Crawford to start, and then we'll see how Aldon Smith and others. But they've got Dorrance Armstrong. They've got some names. Yep. I just don't know how good the quality behind that number is. For them, they're going to have to kind of piece some things together at that right end. I have a feeling.
Yeah, I've got to ask you a personal question, because the listeners to this podcast that also listen to the Journey to the Draft podcast know that the Cowboys have taken a couple of my favorite day 3 pass rushers the last couple of years. Bradley Anae this year out of Utah, Jalen Jelks last year out of Oregon. How do you kind of see those guys fitting in? You mentioned guys, Crawford and Aldon Smith. Dorrance Armstrong feels like he's kind of instilled himself into that rotation coming out of Kansas. How do you feel Anae and Jelks can kind of help themselves here this summer?
Well, this was something with Jelks. He was a guy that Rod Marinelli really loved. That was his guy. In fact, he went all the way out to Eugene and worked him out, and and that was kind of one of his little secret. Hey, when he saw me in the cafeteria, he's like, "Hey, watch some tape on this kid from Oregon. You watch Jelks yet?" And I'm like, "Yeah, and I didn't think anything, more of it. I just watched as part of something, and sure enough, it's a late deal. But he was a guy that, as you know, was very thin,
Yes.
very thinly built, linear built, up and down kind of guy, and and he was getting rehab. He didn't practice. He didn't have that ability. He was really a smaller guy, and so you worry about, okay, here's the pandemic again. Guys like him and Tristan Hill I mentioned, and these are guys that needed the weight program. They needed the off season. They needed all these things in order to have to maybe be competitive. And I do feel like Onai is an interesting guy, though. Another Pac-12 guy. The people saw him at the Senior Bowl and they're like, oh, who's this guy? And then you watch him play some Pac-12 games and you watch him play against some of the better Pac-12 tackles, and it wasn't as good. You're like going, oh no, so yeah, it's these defensive ends. Sometimes they come in, they get it right off the jump, and then other times it's going to take more strength, more coaching, more preparation. Do you become part of the rotation? The good thing about for Onai is that he might have over some of these other guys is he was drafted by this staff. And
right.
So they're going to push really hard to get him ready and see if he can play.
Sure. And last question I have for you about this roster, Bryan, you've been so generous with your time, is, as well as I do, especially as we're talking like a month from now, you get into the numbers game of the roster, getting down to, whatever the final number is for this year. I have to look and see. I know it's changed. It's always 53, but it feels like
it's going to be 53. Yeah.
All right, so we'll get to the 53. Who are the special teams glue guys? Who are the core four guys that make it onto this roster based purely off their ability to be effective in the third phase of the game?
Yeah, I'll give you one guy that I think that really need to keep an eye on. It's a linebacker named Luke Gifford from Nebraska. He was a Russian. You probably remember, you probably might have studied him when he was in Nebraska. And he had a really good year, coming when he came to training camp. He gets hurt in the very first game, the preseason game, and we're in San Francisco, and he gets hurt. But he had practiced so well up to that point. He'd made some special teams tackles and some stuff. I mean, he was active. He could run. He could do a lot of really good things. The biggest thing special teams-wise is for the Cowboys, it's not so much about the personnel. It's about the coach. Because if you look at with Bones Fossil, John, with John Fossil coming in from the Rams, the Cowboys the last couple of years, quite honestly, they were not prepared well at special teams coach. They just didn't have it. That scheme, the plan of attack, everything about it was just a disaster. They had a coach that wasn't ready to coach special teams and was given the job. And, so now you have one of the better special teams coaches in the league. So it's going to be responsibility for him to get guys like Luke Gifford. Again, keep an eye on him. The kicking situation, they go out and get Zerline. That was really a disaster. I mean, you had 10 missed field goals last year. I mean, to me, that's like having 10 turnovers in a game. Not in a game, but in a season. Every time you miss a field goal, they get the ball in the 38. They get the ball in the 42. They get the ball in the 28, wherever. That's like a turnover when you're missing field goals. So, I think that Bones Fossil will come in. He'll give him some stability, some credibility. Again, keep an eye on a guy like Luke Gifford. And then they'll have to figure out some of these other young guys. You mentioned Robinson. Can he play special teams? This is a team that has struggled a little bit at wide receiver to have special teams players. They haven't. So this is going to be a total remake in that regard.
Is Noah Brown like a guy? Because I just remember like him being kind of like one of those big freak shows coming out of Ohio State. Like, is he a guy that's been that label in his career?
Well, yeah, he's had a knee problem and stuff here lately, and he was a guy that the previous staff loved. He's a big body guy. He came in the game, and when he was in the game, okay, wait, they're going to use him as a blocker. They rarely throw him the ball. I mean, it was one of those dead giveaway things. But yeah, I mean, he's going to be in a battle. He's finally healthy. We'll see how many they keep. You mentioned Cedric Wells. There were guys. I mean, how many of these receivers are they going to keep? But if they're going to keep that fifth or sixth guy, can he play special teams? Noah Brown physically. When you go out and walk around on the beach, when you walk around the Jersey Shore and all that, you want to look like Noah Brown. You want to, when you're walking down the boardwalk, you want to, that's how you want to look, that kind of guy.
You want him first off the bus when the offensive bus pulls up the
absolutely.
stadium.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's Lyle Collins, Zach Martin, and Noah Brown coming, all coming off the bus together, that kind of thing. But yeah, he's a big physical guy and he works really hard. It's just that, the things that they were trying to get him to do, he was struggling with. And we'll see if in fact that, with the new staff, he might be up against it, because it was the previous staff that were the sponsors of him.
And then the last question I've got for you, Bryan, is, as I mentioned, over on the Journey to the Draft podcast, we talk all the time about like the identities of team builders and, strategies that GMs have going into the NFL draft and, scheme fits and things like that. Obviously, the Jones family, they've been installed there in Dallas for so long, and there's a little bit of an identity in terms of how they kind of operate. And you mentioned typically a lot of drafting for need at the top. You had your eye on Caleb Von Chasen, and they kind of shock people going with CD Lamb. Are there some trends that you see with Dallas that maybe we don't talk about on a national scale, but down there in that market that hey, this is their kind of guy in Dallas when you're talking about the NFL draft?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because since 1989, the Jones family has been involved with this team in a lot of different ways. And the front office is when we look at the drafting and things over the years, that's been kind of their main area of the way they're building the team. And, I will say this, they have a rising star as a potential general manager in Will McClay.
Sure.
They really, really do. And I've known Will a long time. I'm not saying this to try and pump air into him or anything like that, or hope he hears it but I do understand a lot of the things that the Cowboys have done is now they've had some drafts last couple where they haven't done as well. But if you look overall how their board has been set and the influence, instead of taking a Johnny Manziel, they take a Zach Martin, or I think Will McClay has had a lot of influence in that. And I do believe that one day, maybe, not this year or next, but we're going to see Will McClay go on and be a general manager, whether it's at the Los Angeles Rams or the Los Angeles Chargers or the Houston Texans or wherever. We're going to see that happen. And but I think that the Joneses did the smart thing by, instead of trusting themselves so much, they trust what Will. Will has done a great job. In Dallas, it's a really unusual situation because whoever is really the director of player personnel, in this case, Will, we call it the triangle, where the top of the triangle is Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones. On one corner is the coaching staff. On the other corner is the scouts. So whoever's in the middle has to make sure that all those groups. Will's been in a situation where he's got guys on the scouting staff that are mad at him, and the coaches are happy, and the Joneses are happy, and so he's you're dealing with all that. That's how this organization is. You deal with that, and but if you know the rules, you can play the game. But I think that he's really helped the Joneses. He's come in and he said, okay, think about our board this way. And he's really done a great job with communication, with the scouts, the coaches, and the Joneses, getting everybody on the same page. And I think that's what's made the Cowboys better. They made the decision to draft CeeDee Lamb because he truly was their best player on their board. Mm-hmm. They could have taken Chase on. I mean, draft night, I could have said, oh, here we go. We're going to take Chase on. Here we go. We knew, and the fact that they went the other way just tells me that, Will's discussion with the Joneses were, let's not draft for need here. Let's take this guy. This guy, we think he's the sixth best player on our board, and we're picking here at 17. Let's draft this guy. Let's take him. There's a reason why we like this guy. So I think that the influence that he's had, and I have a feeling, like I say, one day he'll step away from the Jones. Maybe not. Maybe Stephen Jones will say, hey, we'll give you more of a role, more of a title. But if Will can run his own team, I think he'd do a really, really good job.
Well, Bryan, thank you so much, man. You were extremely generous with your time. We would get from soup to nuts with this Dallas Cowboys team. So informative. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade.
I appreciate that, Fran. Thanks so much for having me. It's always good to be with you guys.
Great stuff from Bryan, who you can follow just like I do on Twitter at Bryan Broaddus. And while you're at it, I'm at EaglesXOs. That's where I post all the podcasts I'm a part of and all of our X's and O's content that we produce at PhiladelphiaEagles.com. And you know, I greatly appreciate everybody that promotes this podcast on all forms of social media. That's one way to support the show. But the other way is to go into Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating and leave us a comment. Listen, we're a couple of weeks away now from the start of practice for training camp, right? It's just around the corner. And once practices start, this podcast will be coming at you every single day with recaps from practice. I'll be down on the field watching every single day. So I'll be bringing you the action right afterwards. I'll be coming right back to my little studio here in my basement to give you everything that I saw from practice. Can't wait for all of that to start. And if you like what you hear, both on these podcasts and on the ones upcoming, just go on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. It's the best way. Just show us your love. Show us that you appreciate us. It's the best way to kind of help us out, especially as football season, the start of it, comes closer and closer. So thanks so much to Bryan. Thanks to all of you out there as well for all the support, not just for this podcast, but all of our podcast offerings on PhiladelphiaEagles.com. The Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. We're in full gear over there. Dane Brugler, Ben Fennell, and I, we are breaking down every single conference in college football because that sport is really starting to round into form as well as they kind of announce their plans for what college football could look like here, like again, to start here in the 2020 season. Obviously, a lot of unknowns with everything going on in the world right now. But as those start to come into place, we're talking about the top prospects around the country when it comes to the NFL draft and college football. So make sure you go tune into that over on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. That's going to do it here for another show in the books here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. For everybody here at the Duffy House, I am Fran Duffy. We will talk to you next week.